Now we're going to get a little bit serious. We're going to talk about socialism a little bit because I heard capitalism mentioned, and socialism is the antithesis of capitalism. So I want to talk about that, where I think that's going, especially amongst my generation. To give you a little bit of update on what's going on in Congress, what happens and what debates really happen in the committees that I'm a part of. And maybe we'll end with what America really stands for and the gratitude we should have for the miracles that we see around us at every turn. So first on socialism, I think a lot about why that conversation has started to rear its ugly head again. And what I've found is, and this is through polling and essentially just talking to people, there's good news and there's bad news, really. The good news is that a lot of the people supporting socialism don't know what socialism is. Okay, they think it's something else. They think it's just nice things. They think it's what you say if you want to be morally good, if you want to be seen as a generous person, somebody who's thoughtful and does things for others. I've noticed that a little bit because in polling, the same people who say they want less government intervention in their lives will also say they're socialists. Okay, so they're not state corporatist socialists. They're not statists. There's something else. And I'll give you an example. I saw this debate between a student who was a self-proclaimed socialist and Ben Shapiro, and the student's bringing up an example of a company in Spain that's basically a workers' co-op. Okay, basically the workers share the profits. And he was asked, well, does the state make them do that? And he said, no, it's just it's their business model. They decided that works best for their business model. Okay, well, that's capitalism. That has nothing to do with socialism. But people are thinking that's socialism, so that's interesting. So when we have this debate, we always have to ask the person what they actually mean. Some people think the military, if you have a military, you're a socialist country. No, that's a government program paid for by our taxes. So we always got to dig down into the actual core of the issue. I would say the bad news is that some people legitimately mean socialism. They legitimately mean they want far more government control over your businesses and your lives. And also the bad news is that people aren't being educated correctly. If we're just throwing around definitions and words that used to have meaning and no longer do, well, that's a problem with our education system as well. So that's the bad news. But here's the worst news, in my opinion. This isn't going to be all bad, doom and gloom, mostly, but not all. Here's the rest of the bad news is, and I think about this more, where this trend is coming from. So if you're just center of left, you tend to be highly focused on inequality. You tend to be focused on inequality and a sense of caring for others. Injustice is a word often used. So if you're focused on inequality, like I'm not, for instance, I'm focused on poverty. I think poverty is something that we should care about, and the ability of people to climb the economic ladder, I think that's extremely important. But why inequality? Well, inequality is a distraction because if you're concerned about inequality, only 50% of your attention is focused on the poor and the rest of it's focused on the rich. There's the resentment for the rich, and you can see this pretty much every day in politics. And if you just read Bernie Sanders' Twitter feed, you'll know that there's a deep, and he's leading, by the way, in the Democratic presidential primary candidates, and there is a deep resentment being caused here. This resentment just continues to boil over, and you got to ask yourself, at what point is the inequality acceptable? And that's the problem that they never answer. And this is why it's not sustainable, and this is why I would also say that even if it's well-intentioned, I would say liberalism, which there's nothing really wrong with except that they want too much government intervention in our lives, but it's not malevolent in any way. The problem with that is you have to keep promising more to people to get there. And once you've solved a problem, once you've solved a little bit of injustice or a little bit of inequality, well, you've got to run on something else as a politician, so you've got to solve another thing, and then another thing, and then another thing. And this inevitably keeps piling on upon itself with no real principles guiding that direction. This is progressivism. It's progress at all costs. And so this is what I worry about, because while it's well-intentioned at first and didn't really have anything to do with socialism or true socialism at first, inevitably it has to get there. It has to. You really don't have a choice. And that's what's concerning, because it just builds and builds and builds and builds. And if there's still too much inequality, well, how are we going to fix that? We need more control. I need to see your payrolls now. I need to see the resumes at everybody who works at a business. I need to make sure that they're getting paid what I think they should be getting paid because I'm the benevolent bureaucrat. This inevitably happens. It might take years or decades, but it will happen with that initial mentality. That's why we fight against it right from the get-go. That's why we start off with principles of free markets and protection of personal property rights and understanding that that's government's role to create the infrastructure and the environment for people to thrive and compete. So we see hierarchies differently. There's a difference there's going to be hierarchies in a society no matter what. It's one thing to have them based on merit. It's quite another if you desire to base those hierarchies based on identity. This is the other problem that we're seeing. When you start to pit people against each other in identity politics, it also, I think, inevitably leads to something like socialism. Because what you're doing is you're promising people power over one another. That's effectively what identity politics is. I promise your group power over another group. That's kind of a scary thing. If you want something to truly divide us and truly cause resentment in American society and really start ripping us apart, identity politics are a great way to do it. The most interesting thing is that I've seen the Democratic candidates start to accuse the Republicans of identity politics and playing in that game. I don't see how that's remotely true. In any case, it's bad, if any side does it. And it's certainly leading to the divisions that I think we're seeing today. That's my little bit about socialism. What's going on in Congress? Well, unfortunately, not as much as you would like. I would say a lot, but also nothing you would like. As you know, the House of Representatives, the majority controls that pretty well. It's not like the Senate where the 60-vote threshold forces some sense of compromise. So I'm on Homeland Security Committee and I'm on the Budget Committee. I'll start with Homeland Security Committee. As you know, I got up there and I was in the middle of the fight on the border wall. I think we eventually lost that fight, and there's a lot of reasons for that that started well before I got there. But I think we effectively lost that battle, unfortunately. And it's also unfortunate that we may be dealing with another side that truly doesn't want operational control of our border. And I didn't think that at first until we went through these negotiations and I started seeing the evidence for that claim. What we need now, when we have a true crisis on the border, 400,000 illegal immigrants crossing last year. We're on track to maybe almost 1 million this year. It was like 100,000 back in March. That's a completely unsustainable number. I don't use the argument that's often thrown out there that, well, we got to protect ourselves from crime and drugs and murderers and all these things. That's not a good argument. It falls on deaf ears when we use that argument. The simpler argument, the one we should use, is it's unsustainable. A society can't absorb that many people. All right, Democrats proved that actually this week when they said they didn't want their sanctuary cities to have all the illegal immigrants bust there. You just can't absorb it. Our hospitals here, our low-income hospitals, LBJ, for instance, 25% of their funding goes towards illegal immigrants. That's supposed to be for low-income Americans, but it's not. It's for 25% of it, at least, is for illegal immigrants. Our schools, our court systems, they're all being completely overwhelmed. We're on leave from Congress for 2 weeks. Meanwhile, our border agents are being completely overwhelmed. They have to ask themselves why they're even doing the job that they're doing. Why do they even catch people and process them just to let them go into the population? Because that's exactly what's happening. People have realized over time that they can take advantage of our asylum process, that all they have to do is walk across the border, claim asylum, and completely overwhelm our border agents while the drug cartels who put them across at that crossing point then go around while our border agents are actually distracted. And they know that those people will simply be let go because they brought a kid with them. So there's an incentive to bring a child with you. It doesn't even have to be your child. And they often recycle children. So now we have human trafficking on mass scales. None of this is good. It's unsustainable for our culture and our society, and it's unsustainable for the people being trafficked. And if you want another good reason, well, you're cutting in front of legal immigrants. And if we want to have a good conversation about upping the quota for legal immigrants, like, let's have that. I have family who's legal immigrants. All of us probably know legal immigrants. They did it the right way, and they're very frustrated that that people can just cut in front of them, and that they would have to wait years and spend money and really cherish that citizenship that they eventually get, while everybody else just does it the wrong way and then gets rewarded and protected for it. None of this is moral in any sense of the word, and we have to fix it. We have to fix it with changes to our asylum processing laws. That would have the most immediate effect. So basically what that means, put more immigration judges down at the border, put more detention facilities, adjudicate these claims right away, and if they're found not to be valid, you return them right away. No more catch and release. And we need the resources to be able to do that. And we need to be able to get creative with how we do it too. Keep them in Mexico while we wait their claims. There's no danger in Mexico. It is false to say so. We should be able to have them apply for asylum processing in Honduras, in El Salvador, in Guatemala. There's nothing wrong with that. It's been done before, actually, by Clinton with Haiti. These things aren't inhumane. It's just getting back control of our sovereignty and having a collective understanding that we deserve to have operational control of our border. Moving on to the Budget Committee, and I think this is where maybe you all get more interested, if you're not interested already, I don't know. The Budget Committee is interesting because there's a fundamental debate that happens in the Budget Committee, and it's two fundamental debates: why there's a debt and why government exists. And why is there a debt? So it was interesting. It was the first hearing we had in Budget Committee, and everybody, Democrats and Republicans, were all very upset about the debt, and it's everybody's fault. Let's just be honest. But everybody has different reasons for why we think there's a debt, and this is an interesting dichotomy. Democrats think there's a debt because of the tax cuts. We think there's a debt because of mandatory spending. I think the math is on my side on this one. 70% of our spending is mandatory, meaning we don't even vote on it every year. As a percentage of GDP, the only portion of spending that is going up is actually mandatory spending. So Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the debt, these things. Discretionary spending, meaning all of the federal agencies that you know about, Department of Defense, et cetera, that's actually going down as a percentage of GDP. The question of taxes, right? So there's this idea that if we just taxed people a little bit more, we could spend more on all these benevolent programs that we think are so great, and that get us reelected because we can promise people more stuff. Remember what I talked about before? Always promising people more stuff. Easiest thing in the world to do to get reelected. I wish I could run on that, but I won't because it's immoral. So here's the math on the taxes. Last year and this upcoming year, we're going to have more federal revenue than we've ever had before. As a percentage of GDP, federal revenue, meaning, again, the money we take in from taxes, is going to stay at about 17% of GDP. And it's not really changing. It is going up, actually, over the next few years. It is going up. So historically, it's always been around 16, 17% of GDP. So I don't think we have a taxation problem. We have record revenues coming in. But the one thing that is skyrocketing is mandatory spending. So mathematically, where's the debt coming from? And this idea that the tax cuts caused the debt is also really interesting because it also assumes that history began like 2 years ago, right? And that's where the $22 trillion debt came from. That's obviously not true. So, and why is this debate happening? Well, one, it's just politics. Everybody pointing the finger in the blame game. But I think there's a fundamental difference in how we see the role of government. So on the one side, if you believe that the role of government is to continue to create more programs, but again, designed by benevolent academics with these one-size-fits-all great ideas construed up in Washington, well then you're always going to be looking for the money to fund that. This great idea that you think is so moral and ethical. So where are you going to find that money? Well, there's profits over here. There's profits over there. There's probably a lot of profits in this room. Why not just tax you? And they'll want to tax you as much as mathematically possible. It's a way of thinking that is simply different, right? They think that government exists to fund itself and all the good stuff. Now, who defines that good stuff? Well, they do. And that's kind of the problem. It's not, there isn't a set of moral truths that actually define what good is for them, but in any case, they believe it's good, and we want to tax you as much as mathematically possible to get there. I don't believe that's what government is for. Government is there to create an infrastructure for you to thrive in. It is there to provide for the common defense and provide the necessary regulations for our economy as a whole to survive as one. But that's it. The rest of it should either be put at the state level or the local level, or more importantly, the community level, the family level. Government exists to protect your inalienable rights, nothing more. And those inalienable rights are dictated by our founding documents: as life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, protection of property rights. These are the things government is for. We get away from that. We've forgotten about that. And if you believe that's what government is for, then you would also believe that we should tax people just enough, just the necessary amount. And that's what the tax cuts were about. How much can we lower this and still get federal revenue? It turns out we could probably keep going. We could probably simplify it a little bit more. There's a lot more that we can do, but it's also undeniable that these things have been good for our economy. I'm not so sure anybody in here would deny that. Between tax cuts and deregulation, a general business-friendly environment, we've seen amazing growth. We've seen the miracle of America start to take off again. You know, we have 3% GDP growth, 3.2% wage growth. I'm seeing I have a whole list, and I don't read my speeches anymore, so it's in there somewhere. But there's a whole list. There's a whole list of companies here in Houston and in Texas that are giving bonuses, giving wage increases. It's happening. This stuff is real. But there's been a massive misinformation campaign against the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and it's really unfortunate. 82% of people are getting a tax cut. They're like 6% are paying more taxes, mostly really wealthy people in California, New York, New Jersey, those kind of places because of their high state taxes. I don't see anything wrong with this. It's interesting that there's this fight about, okay, we have a debt, we all agree there's a bad debt, but then there's this fight about as if there's a moral equivalence between letting people keep more of their money and spending. There's no moral equivalence there. One is worse than the other. Spending is worse, clearly, than letting people keep more of their money. And there's this weird resentment about letting people keep more of their money, as if the government should decide how much is too much. The problem with that is, again, where does it end? Where does it end? There's no framework from which to operate in. This is why I said in the beginning, this instinct to have resentment over success, to want to punish success, it will end in true socialism. Even if people right now don't really mean socialism, it will end that way. That is what is wrong with that kind of thinking. That is what is wrong with pitting different groups against each other in order to gain power, in order to gain votes. I think being a conservative is about gratitude more than anything else. It's about gratitude for everything that got us here. It's about the cultural narratives and principles that led to the constitutional principles that eventually created this miracle that we live in, where we all have little supercomputers in our pockets, where we complain quite a bit when that supercomputer doesn't work exactly like we think it should. I was saying this the other day, like when you're at 30,000 feet and you've got Wi-Fi, and you're like barreling through the sky like a god, and you're mad because your email is too slow. This is the world we live in right now. But we complain incessantly. People in my generation really complain incessantly. But what caused that miracle? I thought about this a lot too. What are those cultural narratives that create a sustainable society? Well, one is personal responsibility. And we don't always talk about why that's important, though. So personal responsibility is important because if you don't have it, you're not empowered. And if you're disempowered, well, then you're depressed and you're not contributing. And if you're not personally responsible, then by definition, you believe others should be responsible for you. And therefore, you have to infringe on their freedoms, or you have to ask someone else to infringe on their freedoms, meaning the government, because you've put all your faith in government. Because politicians kept telling you that they were going to solve all your problems, and then your problems didn't get solved exactly how you thought they should. So you elect a new politician who'll promise more ways to solve your problems. Then everybody's depressed because their problems don't solve, because we asked the government to do it. We asked an impossible job. We forgot about personal responsibility. We forgot about the fact that we own our own destiny. A society starts to believe that they're not in charge of their own destiny, well, society's not going to survive. We don't have that much longer. The second thing you need is basic mental toughness and discipline. This idea that you're going to forego pleasure, you're going to forego gratification because you're disciplined and because you want to compete. Like a mentally tough person, you need to compete in a free society. People who are weak-minded can't compete in a free society. They can't do what you do in business. And you have more and more people like that who don't value that, who value victimhood instead. And you see that in this outrage culture that we have all around us. If you don't start to value mental toughness, then again, our society starts to decay. Third thing is loyalty. Loyalty to our country. A sense of duty to your country. And a sense that the things that bring us together, there are not many of them. It's not skin color, it's not religion, it's not heritage. Everybody can become an American. That's what's really cool about America. But there are certain things that bring us together, whether it's the Pledge of Allegiance or the national anthem or the flag or our history, our founding documents. Those bring us together. But we forget about that. We forget about the meaning of a pluribus unum. But if we don't have that, and if you don't care about that, then it's actually not surprising that you might be for open borders. Because why? Who cares? You don't care about the sovereignty of a country. You don't even care about your nationhood. The fourth thing is virtue and where that virtue comes from. And it comes from God. It has to. Because if it doesn't, if morality just comes from yourself, then it's just an opinion. And if morality is an opinion, then it can be changed at any moment. And if it can be changed at any moment, then you do get secular socialist societies. And we do see the horrors that we have seen in the last 100 years with Nazism and communism and Maoism and the like. That's secularism. That's what happens when humans decide that they know morality better than God and that they place that morality in government. And the last thing is liberty. And we don't need to explain liberty to you really, but I would point out that you can't have liberty without all of those things I just mentioned. You just can't. Because liberty isn't exactly freedom. Freedom just means do whatever you want. Liberty is freedom within a set of rules, and you can't be free people without moral virtue, because how can we trust you with freedom if you're not good? That's why we write "In God We Trust" on our coins and on the house floor. That's why it's so important. That's why personal responsibility is so important, because that leads to liberty. These things are connected. You can't escape them. And that's what America is about. Those things, they led to the founding documents, where we took all the best ideas that humankind have ever had, that moral truth from Jerusalem, and reason from Athens, and sense of law from Rome, and checks and balances from London. And we talked, and we put those all together. We wrote them down in Philadelphia. And we came up with the best idea that humankind had ever had, which was America. And that led to the miracle we have today. And we can't let that go. We must be grateful for it. I think that's why we meet here in places like this, to be grateful for the miracle that is the United States of America. Thank you so much for having me.